I pulled into my driveway and froze. My wooden privacy fence gone. Dug out, splintered, scattered, heart pounding. I spotted Clara Wells by the new community pool sipping iced coffee like she owned the world. It was ugly, she said, smirking. Now the pool looks perfect. My voice shook. You can't just destroy my property, she laughed. I make the rules here. File a complaint if you want. I walked away calm on the outside, furious inside. She thought she'd won. But tomorrow when the surveyor marks the real property lines, she'll wish she hadn't crossed me. I stormed toward the HOA clubhouse, my boots crunching on the gravel. Clara Wells didn't flinch. She was standing proudly beside the sparkling new pool, clipboard in hand, neon blazer, sharp under the sun. Without missing a beat, she spun to face me, sipping her coffee like she had every right to tear down my fence. You're overreacting, she said, waving a hand at the empty space where my fence had stood. It was blocking the view. The community deserves better. I'm just doing my job. Her smirk said she thought this was all a game. I clenched my fists. This is my property. You can't just I can, she interrupted smoothly, stepping closer. I'm the HOA president. Rules are rules and I make them. Your old fence was an eyesore. Now it's gone. Deal with it. She turned to the pool again, tapping the edge with her pen like marking territory. That's when I noticed it. The pool stretched farther back than I'd imagined. Her legacy was built partially on my land. Clara thrived on control. Every decision she made screamed authority, the clubhouse, the landscaping, the color of the lounge chairs. She ruled with a mix of charm and intimidation, and she enjoyed the helplessness of anyone who questioned her. But her overconfidence was about to be her undoing. She didn't know I had already called a surveyor, and tomorrow her empire of blue water might not be hers at all. The first note appeared the morning after Clara took down my fence. A crisp white envelope stuck between the mailbox and my front gate. Grass too tall. Unsightly debris. Community standards must be upheld. Signed C. Wells HOA. My pulse spiked, but I folded it neatly and set it aside. By midday, another small nuisance appeared, a survey stake in my yard marked with red tape. Someone had wandered onto my property without asking, claiming it was routine inspection. I snapped photos documenting every move. Clara thrived on these petty intrusions, micromanagement of every inch of my yard, the slightest imperfection magnified. I tried to stay calm, but it was a warning she wanted control, and she thought these small acts would make me anxious, compliant. Instead, they strengthened my resolve. I needed to reclaim my property and dignity, and I knew there was only one way to hit back: smart, deliberate, and undeniable. A week later, I saw the surveyor's nightmare materialize. Clara had extended the new pool deck 10 feet, encroaching onto my land. I watched from the kitchen window, coffee in hand, as her contractors measured, laughed, and poured concrete without a hint of caution. I stormed outside. You can't do this. That's my property, I yelled. She spun around, clipboard raised like a shield. The HOA rules apply to the whole community. This pool is for everyone. Stand down. Her contractors glanced at me, unsure whether to continue. One paused, pencil hovering over plans. I snapped a photo of the laser line, proof that the pool sat partially on my property. Clara's smirk didn't waver. Relax. Everything's fine. You're making a fuss over nothing. Because I worked from home part-time and watched my yard daily, I caught every violation. I documented everything meticulously. Red tape measurements, contractors' tools on my land. Every layer of her intrusion became fuel for my strategy. Tomorrow, the surveyor would officially mark the true property line. Then came the ultimate violation. My fence was gone. Not a panel missing, but the entire structure splintered. Boards, uprooted posts, debris tossed across the lawn. It wasn't just property. It was my sanctuary, the buffer that kept her overreach at bay. I stormed to the clubhouse, finding Clara leaning casually on the new lounge chairs, sipping her latte. It was blocking the view, she said, eyes glinting with amusement. Now it's all open. You should thank me. I could feel my pulse hammering, the mix of anger and disbelief sharp as steel. This wasn't just a fence. It was years of privacy, of evenings spent in peace, now destroyed for her obsession with aesthetics. I called my lawyer immediately. Documents, deeds, proof of ownership. I collected them all. This wasn't about retaliation yet. It was about preparation, gathering ammunition. Clara thought she had diminished me, but she had no idea she'd just opened the door to something far bigger. By dusk, I had plans. My fence would return exactly on my property line, and if she wanted to fight it, she would discover just how costly her arrogance could be. Clara's temper flared when she realized the surveyor's team would be coming. She called the police claiming vandalism and destruction of HOA property. I watched from the driveway as 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing in the early morning sun. "Sir, can I help?" the first officer asked. I handed over my deed, then the survey maps clearly marked and certified. He glanced at the documents, then at the red-staked boundary lines. A faint smile appeared. "Ma'am, he's right. That pool sits partially on his property. He can legally erect a fence there." Clara's face turned pale. She sputtered, trying to argue, waving the HOA handbook like a shield. The officer barely looked at it, shaking his head. "You built on someone else's land without permission. This isn't your call." The tension exploded in her eyes. She had counted on fear and compliance. Instead, authority sided with me. That day, I realized the fight was no longer abstract. It was legal, tangible, and entirely in my favor. The next morning, I hired a construction crew to begin drilling the new fence 6 feet tall, straight along the exact property line. And yes, that line ran through Clara's pool deck. At 6 a.m., jackhammers shattered the morning quiet. Concrete dust flew. Crew members grunted, pounding posts into the pool slab. Clara appeared in her bathrobe hair, wild, screaming like a banshee. "Stop! You can't do this! That's community property!" I sipped my coffee calmly. "Morning, Clara. Remember when you said my fence was ugly? Consider this a redesign." She ran to the shallow end, trying to block a post from being set. One worker paused, then laughed nervously. The officer from yesterday showed up watching quietly. I handed him the deeds again, letting him witness the progress. By noon, half the pool was obstructed by tall wooden panels, water spraying around the posts. Clara's shrieks echoed through the neighborhood. She realized the gravity of her mistake. She had built a luxury pool on private land, and now she couldn't stop me from reclaiming what was mine. Her panic was deliciously public. Neighbors began gathering, murmurs spreading. The pool, her pride and legacy, was being divided by my fence legally and irreversibly. The stage was set for the climax, evidence, confrontation, and her ultimate downfall. By mid-morning, half the community had gathered, drawn by the chaos. Clara Wells was pacing back and forth in front of the obstructed pool, her neon blazer clashing with the bright blue water now split by my wooden wall. Her clipboard swung in her hands like a weapon. "You can't just do this," she yelled, her voice cracking. "This is HOA property. Everyone will be furious." I stepped forward, holding my coffee calmly. "Clara, this is my property. The pool sits partially on my land. The fence follows the legal survey. You built your legacy on someone else's dirt," neighbors whispered, pointing at the fence slicing through the water. The murmur became a chorus of gasps. Some shook their heads, others pulled out phones, documenting every inch of the construction. Clara turned her fury on them. "You don't understand. This fence is a disaster. He's destroying our community." A few residents stepped closer, squinting at the survey stakes in the fence. "Wait. Isn't that your pool partially on his land?" one muttered. Another nodded, phone out, showing the deed I had handed to the officer the day before. Clara's smug certainty faltered. She tried a last-ditch threat, waving her arms. "I'll call the board. I'll have you fined, arrested." I met her eyes. "Do it. Everything here is documented. Every inch. You broke the rules, and you built on private land. You've already lost." The crowd shifted, the tension palpable. Clara's voice faltered. Her control slipped, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. I gestured toward the survey stakes and the laser-measured boundary lines. "Look closely," I said. "The pool extends 10 feet onto my property. The fence is exactly where it belongs." I handed over the certified survey, along with the deed and photographs of the demolished fence, the notes, and the prior harassment documentation. The officer who had come earlier stood beside me, nodding. "Everything here is accurate. He has full legal rights to erect that fence." Clara froze, staring at the documents. Her hands shook as she flipped through the pages. The neighbors leaned in, whispering, their murmurs growing louder. "You built without permission. It's not community property. It belongs to him," one neighbor said, voice rising. Her previous smirk vanished. She tried to interject, to twist the narrative, but each protest was silenced by evidence. Every map, every measurement, every official mark proved her wrong. Her empire of control, the pool she had flaunted, as her legacy was crumbling under documented truth. A few brave neighbors stepped forward. "Why wasn't this checked before construction?" one asked. Why wasn't the property line respected? Clara had no answers. Her authority, which she wielded like a sword, disintegrated in front of everyone. Every lie she had told, every unilateral decision, now hung exposed. I watched her falter, her voice catching as the weight of undeniable evidence pressed down. The crowd's energy shifted from curiosity to outrage at her overreach. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the betrayal of trust, the abuse of HOA power, and the destruction of a private homeowner's property. Clara realized that her manipulation and arrogance had turned public opinion entirely against her. The emergency HOA meeting was called the same afternoon. Residents poured into the clubhouse, some still wet from the disrupted pool area, others clutching phones full of evidence. Clara tried to assert control, but her voice barely carried over the crowd. One by one, neighbors presented their observations, the photographs, the survey documents, and the destruction she had caused. The room echoed with disbelief and frustration. Her bored allies shifted uneasily, realizing that the documented facts couldn't be ignored. I didn't mean for this to get out of hand," Clara stammered. Her usual poise and confidence were gone. She was scrambling for explanations, but the truth had a weight heavier than her words. The board voted unanimously. Clara Wells was removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. The crowd erupted with quiet applause, some shaking their heads, others exchanging incredulous looks at the downfall of someone who had once seemed untouchable. Meanwhile, I walked past the obstructed pool, the wooden fence cutting through the center. Water splashed around the posts, glinting in the afternoon sun. The pool, once her pride, was now unusable. Contractors had paused work, legal notices would follow, and the HOA was liable for repairs and fines. Every detail she had overlooked now cost her publicly, financially, and reputationally. Clara collapsed into a lounge chair, hands covering her face, her empire of control reduced to a divided empty pool and mounting bills. She looked up at me, eyes wide, a mix of fear and disbelief. The neighbors watched quietly, witnessing the collapse of the authority she had wielded so arrogantly. I stepped back, coffee in hand, calm as ever. The fence stood tall, marking my land, asserting my rights. Clara's reign of control was dismantled piece by truth evidence and careful planning. And as she stared helplessly, I knew this victory would linger, a silent, permanent reminder that private property and lawful rights could not be overrun by arrogance. The moment Clara was removed, the tension in the neighborhood shifted. Murmurs of disbelief gave way to nods of relief. I walked along the newly completed fence, 6 feet of sturdy oak, marking the true edge of my property, bisecting the pool that had once been Clara's pride. The water lapped harmlessly against the posts, now harmless barriers of legality and order. Neighbors approached cautiously, some smiling, some still shaking their heads at the audacity of what had unfolded. "I can't believe she tried this," one man said, pointing at the fence slicing through the shallow end. Another woman whispered, "You handled this perfectly. Calm, precise, like a chess master." Children had been kept safely away, but their laughter echoed in the distance from adjacent yards. Pets roamed freely, oblivious to the morning chaos. For the first time in weeks, the neighborhood felt open, not under Clara's suffocating scrutiny. I moved along the fence line, inspecting each post, each joint. It was finished just as the surveyor had marked it: precise, permanent, undeniable. There was satisfaction in watching it stand tall, a silent testament to what respect for private property could achieve. Some neighbors waved. A few even offered congratulations, their eyes glinting with the shared thrill of watching someone finally take a stand. Despite the drama, there was a calm that settled in, a feeling that balance had returned. The HOA, shaken and embarrassed, now had a clear line: overreach had consequences. And the community seemed to understand that for the first time in years, the HOA had no choice but to comply. They were legally liable for constructing the pool over private property, and the expenses began to mount immediately. Contractors had to jackhammer sections of the concrete, remove filtration systems, and rebuild parts of the deck. An additional cost estimated at $55,000. Every invoice, every labor hour, documented meticulously. The board convened an emergency meeting, formalizing Clara's removal and issuing fines for unauthorized construction. They were required to reimburse part of my legal fees and pay a convenience fee for the property strip the pool encroached upon. The letters were official notarized and clear the HOA could no longer claim any authority over my yard. I met with my lawyer once more, finalizing the paperwork. The deed, survey documents, and construction reports all confirmed my land's boundaries. It was undeniable, codified, and enforceable. Clara could argue no further. Even the police officer who had witnessed the confrontation appeared, verifying that all actions I had taken were within legal bounds. The community understood the law favored property rights over HOA overreach, and Clara's personal vendetta had failed spectacularly. By midweek, the HOA began internal restructuring. The remaining board members were chastened, meetings became formalized, and a new president was elected with transparency as a priority. Word spread quickly. Abuse of HOA authority would no longer be tolerated. My small victory had sparked systemic accountability. A few days later, I agreed to remove the fence after receiving the compensation from the HOA. The wooden posts came down carefully, the laborers cautious not to damage the repaired pool deck. By evening, the backyard looked open again, but the memory of the wall slicing through the water remained a silent warning, a tale that would linger in neighborhood lore. Clara still lived next door. She avoided eye contact, her attempts to assert authority gone, replaced by careful avoidance. No longer did she stroll across lawns uninvited. No longer did she measure grass with a ruler. She had learned that private property was more than lines on a map. It was defended by preparation, legality, and patience. I spent the next afternoon tending my garden, sipping coffee as the sun dipped behind the trees. The neighborhood had regained a sense of calm. Conversations at the local park and in front yards now contained laughter instead of whispered worries about HOA tyranny. People were still cautious, but they smiled when they saw me walking past the fence saga, having cemented a new respect. The pool remained usable only on the HOA's reconstructed half, but that was fine. My purpose had never been destruction, it had been assertion. I defended my space, my rights, and my peace of mind. The community had witnessed the cost of arrogance, and the lesson lingered like a ripple across the water. As I leaned back on the garden bench, I glanced at Clara's house. She was watering flowers, careful now, deliberate in her movements, aware that the neighborhood had shifted. And I smiled. A victory had been earned, not with anger, but with strategy. The fence, the survey, the construction, it all culminated in one undeniable truth. You don't mess with someone prepared, patient, and informed. I raised my coffee to the sunset. Quiet, final, and cinematic. Justice, in the form of legality, precision, and community observation, had prevailed. And the story, well, it would be told for years to come.